In South Africa, top banks have given evidence to the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. Monday had been set aside for the Standard Bank to indicate the reasons behind the closure of accounts related to the Gupta family. In its defence, the bank said it took the steps following suspicious banking activity. It had been suspected that the decision by Standard Bank was based on fears of breaking local and international money laundering laws.
It was reported that Absa Bank had elected to terminate all banking relations with these entities in the Gupta Group. Now, we would obviously accept that Absa Bank is bound by the same laws as we are, so if they saw good reason to terminate, it put us on notice that we should look carefully ourselves as to what relation we had and whether we were at risk. And that more or less stimulated the commencement of the gathering of information. In no particular order, KPMG, who were the auditors to the group, then announced that they were terminating as auditors. You can fairly assume that an auditor would have far greater insight into the affairs of a company or group of companies than would the bankers. We typically only get given evidence about creditworthiness. So that was a concern. The decision was taken based on that we could no longer continue. All those combined factors that we should terminate our banking relationships.
Well, South Africa's inquiry into government corruption and graft by the controversial Gupta family is continuing. Today's focus was on the family's bank accounts. Standard Bank gave testimony on how the Gupta family sought intervention from the ruling ANC when they were slapped with a notice to close their account. Angelo Coppola joins us in Johannesburg with the details. Angelo, let's just recap for viewers who have not been following the story. Why did Standard Bank decide to close down the Gupta family account?
Well, Ian Sinton, who is the ex-chief legal counsel at the bank, said they'd spotted a series of red flags, as he called it, from Absa pulling the plug, as you heard just now, to Oaktree, a Gupta-owned company or business, trying to gain access to a $150 million rehabilitation fund that Standard Bank was in fact looking after on behalf of Optimum coal mine. You'll remember, of course, that mine was also bought by the Guptas. The funding for the Optimum deal was also another red flag. It was questionable because the Bank of Baroda had put up a large chunk of cash to buy that business from Glencore, and literally a couple of days after that deal was done, attempted to transfer the money out of the Standard Bank account, that 150 million, into the Bank of Baroda, which is an offshore bank. So there was also lots of involvement from the ex-minerals minister, Zwane, which also put a red flag up, and he was involved in the Optimum sale and went to Geneva to go and close the deal with the Guptas. So there were a range of clues and red flags that eventually forced Standard Bank's hand, and they made that decision then. Karen?
And Angelo, according to Standard Bank, how did the Gupta family try to fight the bank's move to shut their account?
Well, according to Sinton again, he said there was a two-pronged approach. First, there was the public campaign, which was an advertising campaign using the Gupta media platforms, that was the newspaper and the television station, to try and induce Standard Bank to reverse that decision that they'd taken. And they were appealing to the fact that there were some 7,000 people's jobs at risk if the bank accounts weren't open again. So they tried that hearts and minds approach. But perhaps the more concerning was the behind-the-scenes tactic that the Guptas used. This was exposed for the first time by someone who's intimately involved in at least 3 of those meetings, and that was Sinton. One was with the ANC NEC, no less. That's the highest decision-making body within the ruling party. And everyone's asking why the ANC got involved on something that really had nothing to do with them. Then, of course, there was the Interministerial Committee that was led by, you guessed it, none other than Minerals Minister at that time, Mosebenzi Zwane, who went on to that Optimum buying trip with the Guptas. And in that meeting was Zwanele Manyi. He was acting as an advisor to Zwane. Now, Manyi later went on and bought the Guptas 2 media platforms for around $30 million. Only for those 2 businesses to fold a year later. And finally, there was a meeting with Oak Bay, and senior executives again tried this appeal to the hearts of Standard Bank and the 7,000 people who might lose their jobs if the accounts didn't open. Of course, it didn't work, but the dots are now starting to be joined in a very illuminating days worth of testimony. Karen?
Well, you've mentioned a few people there in the ANC. Does today's testimony by the bank incriminate anyone holding public office?
Well, based on what we heard today, most definitely. He's an ex-minister, so there's ex-minister Zwane, who was in minerals. He was booted out by Cyril Ramaphosa. That's after Zwane, who was head of that interministerial committee, was hung out to dry when he issued a statement that President Zuma at the time repudiated. Then there's current Minerals Minister Mantashe, and he's the man, supposedly, according to Standard Bank, who initiated the ANC-NEC meeting with Standard Bank. There's also Minister of Labour, Mildred Olifant. She and Zwane were on that IMC group meeting with the bank, who tried to convince the bank to open those accounts again. She was, as I said, in that IMC meeting with Manye as well. In fact, prior to Sinton's testimony, Mantashe, that's Minister Mantashe's legal team, said that they weren't sure if their client was implicated in anything. Well, today's testimony answered that question very clearly. Tomorrow, of course, we hear from Absa Bank and how they got the ball rolling. Karen?
Okay, Angelo Coppola there. Thank you for that update, Angelo, there in Johannesburg for us.